this college, Justice College, and it may beg the question, why? The reason is, in my opinion, when you read the Bible, you realize quickly that issues like justice and freedom and compassion and mercy are foundational issues to God and in His Word. When you read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, the Bible beats and beats with God's call to justice. In fact, when Jesus comes on earth, He gives His first sermon. He walks into a synagogue in this small town of Nazareth. We read that He goes in there and He grabs a scroll and the place goes silent. And He dramatically opens the scroll and He starts to read. But He's reading the words of Isaiah. This is what He reads, Luke 4. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, and He has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight to the blind and to set the oppressed free. So Jesus here is echoing the words of Isaiah, who's echoing the words of Moses, and they're all echoing the words of God. And so this college, in my opinion, it stretches out the vision of the Grove. It enlarges our vision. It makes our vision not just spread through Arizona, but through the rest of the world, this passion that the Bible and God have for justice and for mercy and for freedom. When we use the phrase justice, I think a number of different thoughts come to mind. And so this morning, I want to talk about the faces that justice takes. For example, I think justice looks like, so what does justice look like? I think justice looks like compassion and mercy. I say that, for example, because over and over in the Bible, you have writers like Micah, and this I could read one of 100 different passages, who connect the idea of justice to compassion and mercy. We read this. He says, what should we come before God? Should I bring more offerings to Him? What will please God, he says. Verse 8, what does the Lord require of you? But to act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. So what is Micah doing here around the issues of justice and mercy? He's teaching the people of Israel God wants mercy and compassion. And so I want to say that mercy and compassion are things that we teach and are learned. I don't think they come intuitively. I think we instinctively take care of our own needs first. But we need to teach and learn issues of compassion and mercy. When I think about that, I think of the moments that have influenced my life. One was when I was in high school. In 10th grade, I was a Baptist for a month. Just 1 month. What happened is my parents had sent me and my brother off to school in the big city, Monrovia, Liberia, and we didn't have anywhere to live the first month, and so the Baptists said we could live with them for 1 month. But then that was it. They knew we'd get on their last nerves because we were Presbyterian, so it was just 1 month. And so during our time there was a couple leading the hostel. They were missionaries from America, and the guy's name was, we called him Uncle Buddy. I don't know what his real name was, but Uncle Buddy. And so Uncle Buddy, every morning while we're getting ready for school to leave, he would go running. He would take a jog. Well, one morning he comes back from his jog and he's covered in blood. We said, Uncle Buddy, what happened? He said, well, I got out on the boulevard and right away I found this woman who had been hit by a car and she's unconscious. She's bleeding profusely. I know she's gonna die. And so I put compressions on her chest and I'm trying to wave down cars, but they're all going past. No one's stopping. He says, finally, this big black Mercedes 500 SL pulls over. And he said, a man gets out of the back seat. He had a driver. He's in a fancy, not really expensive suit and shiny shoes. And he comes over, he says, well, let's lift her in the car. He said, but when I opened the door, I saw this plush carpet and brand new tan leather seats. And I said, are you sure? Uncle Buddy said, are you sure you want me to put her? She's bleeding. And the man says, of course, get her in. She's going to die. And so we put her in the car, and this gentleman gets in the front seat. He's holding the compressions on her wound to stop the bleeding in the back seat. And as they're driving to this hospital, this mission hospital, it's only like 10 minutes away, just in making conversations, he said, so what do you do for a living? Obviously, he's doing well. And he says, the gentleman says, well, I work for the government. He says, well, what do you do for the government? He said, well, I'm the vice president. Here's a vice president of a country. And his name was Vice President Green. And here's what, Vice President Green before he became vice president, was an Anglican bishop. And so now we had this great godly man modeling compassion and mercy for an entire country. When I drive past someone who's on the side of the road and I think, well, maybe I should stop, I always think about Vice President Green. He would stop, so I better stop. Do you see what I mean when I say compassion and mercy are something that we must teach and something that is learned? We must teach our children. We must show to our coworkers. We need to model to our friends and to our neighbors. When I say that, I know growing up for me, compassion and mercy, from as far back as I can remember, when we moved to Africa when I was 6, was modeled in our home. My mother, we had only been in Africa for a few weeks when she realized she had some of the only medication within walking distance. People for literally 50 miles around from villages would walk to our house so that she could treat them and their children. And it wasn't uncommon that if a mother showed up with a baby who was in a lot of trouble, my mother would say, I need to keep her overnight. I need to make sure this baby makes it through the night. So our home turned into kind of like a hospital ward. That was just kind of the norm. My sisters would wake up some mornings with babies tucked in next to them that they didn't go to bed with. We had one girl who fell in a fire and she was burned on the whole side of her face. My mother said she needs to live with us for a month, and so she did. Her name's Comfort, until she was well. This was just the norm. There was another girl who was struck by lightning on our mission, a Liberian girl, and she went blind. So my mother said, I need to keep her at home. So we have this blind girl in our house for 3 weeks. And it was a rough first week because at first the girl wouldn't eat anything. And then my mother made her a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. She never had peanut butter and jelly before in her life. So 3 times a day, she asked for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. 3 weeks later, her sight came back. It was either God or the PB&J. Either one of the two. PB&J may have healing power. But I saw from when I was this big that your house is open. If someone's in trouble, if someone needs help, your doors are open. That compassion and mercy is something that we teach, and our children learn, and our neighbors learn, and our coworkers learn from us, from you. But the greatest coworker story ever came out this last week. There's a woman by the name of Darlene Quinn. Darlene Quinn is single. She lives in Greenville, North Carolina. And Darlene Quinn, 3 months ago, her only car broke down. And so she didn't want to be late for work or miss work, so Darlene just started walking to work. But Darlene's commute was 12 miles each way. I'm not making this up. And her shift started at 4 a.m. She would have to leave her house at 1 in the morning. And her coworker saw her for 3 months walking 12 miles in the dark to get to work. And they couldn't take it anymore. After 3 months, they pulled their resources. Here's what they did. They bought her a car. And we can applaud this. FedEx has some good people. I'm going to tell you that right now. And I saw the news story on this. I kept hitting, the little rewind button because as they're giving her the key, she's saying, "You're making me cry." That's what compassion and mercy looks like. In your workplaces, maybe you are the one that needs to take the initiative to pull the co-workers together to pay someone's rent. You see why I say that it's something that is taught and learned, that we model and we show others. Early in the life of the Grove, I started to hear about people that were making change around the world in the best of ways. I'm reaching back about 10, 12 years ago when we moved onto this campus. At the time, Bono had launched this initiative in Africa called RED. And Bono said he was going to stop the AIDS pandemic. And I was like, that's heroic. And then when the earthquake happened in Haiti, Sean Penn flew down there and he built his own tent city for 40,000 people. This is an actor did that. At the same time, I read Jeffrey Sachs' book. He's a Harvard economist. It's titled The End of Poverty. In it, he says, by the year 2025, we can end extreme poverty. We just need everybody. We need more hoses on the fire, and we can do this. And then also I read Cheryl Woodun's and Nicholas Kristof's book. They are both journalists, world-renowned journalists. And they have this book titled Half the Sky. And they talk about the global oppression and marginalization of women, but how we can start lifting up women. And after it hit me, why are there not more preachers and pastors talking about these things? Why is it just celebrities and journalists and actors and musicians? Why aren't more Christians taking the lead on these things? And so I thought, well, at the Grove, we're not that big. There's not that many of us, but we can start to make a change. And so I started making a list of things that I wanted to challenge us to do that I thought were not being done in churches. And the list grew longer and longer, so I called it a manifesto, and it became our Barefoot Tribe manifesto. And then it turned into chapters in this book titled Barefoot Tribe that Simon & Schuster was good enough to publish. And here's what I wrote. This was our challenge. This is what we've been trying to do for the last 10 years here. We will stop injustice. We will embrace people of every race. We will become modern-day abolitionists. We will end extreme poverty. We will stop the spread of pandemics. We will live simply. And we will love like Christ always. By the way, it's on the back of all of these T-shirts that you see people wearing. They're on all the T-shirts in the courtyard. But the thing is, maybe you hear that. And you think, well, I can't make much of a difference. But I want to say we can. We can turn the tide, for example, on extreme poverty. Just you or your life group or your circle of friends or your family can make a world of difference. I'll end this thought by sharing this, by telling you about Beatrice Bia. Beatrice Bia is from Uganda. When Beatrice was 9 years old, by the time she turned 9, she had never been to school. She said she taught herself math by lining up sticks in front of her hut in Uganda. She said her family never had enough money for her to go to school. But then, when she was 9 years old, a group of Sunday school kids at a church in Connecticut pulled their money together and they bought Beatrice's family a dairy goat. By the way, before I read this story, and this is in Half the Sky, I was like, I didn't even know there's a dairy goat. I didn't know you could get milk out of a goat, but I guess you can. And so they buy her family a dairy goat, and her father starts to milk it every day, and he sells the milk. And all of a sudden, with that daily income, he has enough money to put Beatrice in school. So at 9 years old, she starts going to school. Beatrice says everyone else in first grade with her was like 6 years old, and she was 9, but she didn't let the shame or her pride stop her. And she made it through school, through junior high, and then through high school, and she graduated, all for the cost of one goat. All for a few Sunday school kids in Connecticut pooling their money. The story gets better because her new friends in Connecticut who followed her through high school got her to Connecticut, and they put her in college. In 2008, she graduated from the University of Connecticut. How about that? All for the cost of one goat. But for the price of one goat, there's so many girls, though, that are left behind. But you can change that. The question isn't, can we end extreme poverty? Can we turn the tide? The question is, what will you do as we end extreme poverty? I said justice looks like compassion and mercy. That's what it looks like. Justice, in my opinion, also looks like freedom and liberty. In the Bible, one of the most riveting lines in Scripture is when Moses says to this cruel Pharaoh, he says, God said, let my people go. All through the Bible, we have this heartbeat from God for liberty. Anytime people were in bondage or captivity, God wanted them set free. I have a few passages here. We have this one in Exodus, my favorite one, Exodus 8:1, let my people go. When Pharaoh was slow about saying yes, God rained down punishment from heaven on him. He brought all the resources of heaven to let people go. Psalm 82, David says, rescue the poor and helpless, deliver them from the grasp of evil people. That's a powerful thought. The prophets, we have Isaiah, loose the chains of injustice, untie the cords of the yoke, set the oppressed free, and break every yoke. And then Jesus, like we read earlier, he repeats these same thoughts. He says, I have come to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and to set the oppressed free. Now, here's the thing about liberty and about freedom. I used to think that maybe this is not something that needs to be taught and learned, that maybe it's something that intuitively people would know. But the older I've gotten, I've realized, no, we need to teach people, and people around us, our kids need to learn why freedom and liberty is so important and so biblical. I say this because when you look back at world history and even our own history, for example, in England, slavery did not end until in 1970, one young politician by the name of William Wilberforce started to educate a population. At 26 years old, William Wilberforce became what he described as an evangelical Christian. He said at 26, when he became a Christian, he realized that as he read the Bible, slavery and bondage was abhorrent to God, was an offense, an affront to God, was the worst thing that was happening on planet Earth. And so he went to some of the British colonies. By the way, in England, there were not slaves, but in all of their colonies and in the Americas, there were slaves. And when he saw the conditions of the slaves and the conditions on the slave ships, he couldn't stop talking about it. So he came back to England, and this young politician started giving speeches all over England saying, we must stop this. This is reprehensible. This is an affront to God. He gives a speech to Parliament, and he rocks them with everything that he's seen. And he's saying, we have to turn the tide on this. And then he ends the speech by saying this: you may choose to look the other way, but you can never again say that you did not know, because now you know. His speech, what he taught the members of Parliament and the people of Great Britain, led to the Slavery Abolition Act of 1807. Do you see why I say freedom and liberty are things that we must teach, are things that people learn when we teach it? Even in our own country, it took another 50, 70 years for us to end slavery here. And I've been to Boston not too long ago with Veronica, and we walked what is known as the Freedom Trail. And I didn't know much about the Freedom Trail, and we start the Freedom Trail, and about 3 stops in, we're at a church. It's called Park Street Church. And as you start reading the history of Park Street Church, you realize that the first abolitionists were abolitionist preachers who came to this church to preach sermons against slavery, to say how wrong it was and that it had to end. And the politicians started to listen to them, and people started to listen. And finally, we turned the tide, and slavery was ended. I said that liberty and freedom is something that must be taught. It's something that we learn. Today at 4 o'clock, I'm getting on an airplane to go to Bangkok, Thailand. I was invited by Tyler Reagan. Tyler Reagan is the president of Catalyst Conferences. Catalyst Conference holds events for tens of thousands of pastors every year around the country. And he had invited us, about a dozen of us, to go to Thailand with him so that pastors can see how terrible it is for young women and girls to be sold into the sex trade. Because he wants pastors to come back and preach sermons to their congregation about the problem of bondage in our world today. It may be on the other side of the globe, but it's not a sad inevitable. It's something that we can stop, but we need people like all of us here to become voices for freedom and justice. As I say that, I think about Brian Johnson, because think about this with me. I think every movement for freedom and justice, it starts with one person speaking out first, doesn't it? One of my modern day heroes is Brian Johnson. Brian Johnson has written a book titled Just Mercy. It's a must read for every Christian, in my opinion. He was a young lawyer who, when he just graduated from New York University Law School, he started the Justice Initiative. And he moved back to Montgomery, Alabama, and he started releasing from prison, finding release for prisoners who were wrongly convicted or over-incarcerated. And now he started a national movement to end the over-incarceration of certain populations. Because of Brian Johnson, we have a lawyer at our church. His name is Sean St. Clair, who knows Brian Johnson. And he says he's been inspired by Brian Stevenson. I got the name. By Brian Stevenson. And because of this inspiration, Sean St. Clair has started a justice initiative here. And now with Live, Love Malawi and African Bible College, he goes to Malawi and he's setting prisoners free. And we have a graduate of African Bible College who actually had been in prison himself named Charles. But my father would go to the prisons every Thursday afternoon with a van load of students. And when he was there preaching to the prisoners, Charles accepted Christ. When he got out of prison, he enrolled at African Bible College, and now he's a paralegal, and he and Sean have let dozens and dozens and dozens of prisoners free. For example, boys who have stolen a loaf of bread have spent 3, 4, 5, 6 months in prison when all they needed to pay was a $20 fine, and they didn't have the money to do it, and Sean pays it, and now they're free. Freedom and liberty is something that starts with one person taking action. It's something that we teach. It's something that is learned. I would end by saying this. What if there was a college that dedicated its curriculum to teaching compassion and mercy and freedom and liberty? And I want to say, today there is, and its name is Justice College. Thank you. I have one last face of justice that I want to share with you this morning, and it's this. I think, what does justice look like? Justice looks like equality and dignity. In 1865, the 13th Amendment ended slavery in our country, and that was a great day. But there are some things that laws cannot change. Laws, in my opinion, cannot change the hearts of people. Only God can do that. So even though there was a law against slavery, there was still a huge amount of prejudice and racism in our country. There was a huge lack of equality in our country. And so in 1955, there's a young preacher from Atlanta, Georgia. You know his name well, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. really was at the front of the civil rights movement. This movement was for equity and equality for all people, because he knew that every person had been made in the image of God, but there was not equity and equality and dignity for all people in our country. So Dr. Martin Luther King started preaching sermons. And then, as you know, he ended up on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in the Washington Mall in November 1963, and he gives this famous message, and he says, "I have a dream that one day my 4 little children will live in a nation where they are not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." And Dr. Martin Luther King's dream is not just his dream. In my opinion, his dream is also God's dream. Because from the time that God created human beings, he makes a statement in the first pages of the Bible that we all are created equal, and we all are worth dignity and have value. Look at Genesis 1:26 with me. And God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. My point is, like with Dr. Martin Luther King, this is something that must be taught and people learn. God in his word, as we read it here, for example, has forever settled the question of the equal value of every person, that every person has value and worth and dignity regardless of nationality, regardless of ethnicity or race or immigration status, whether male or female, we are all equally made in the image of God. And so at the Grove, and I say this every once in a while here, at the Grove we will champion and celebrate racial diversity. And we will take steps, every step we can personally and corporately, to make sure that every person is welcomed and included here. But here's what I've realized. These are not things, equity and dignity are not something that naturally happen. It's something that must be taught and learned. And we have to talk about with our children and in our neighborhoods and among our coworkers, or things will never change. For example, when I was in college, my roommate was my twin brother, Paul, until I got married. And after I got married, his roommate was a guy named Oliver. So Oliver was one of a few Liberians who, after we got to Biola University, we helped get some Liberians to Biola with us. One was a good friend named Buddy, who was a phenomenal soccer player. So we got him a soccer scholarship. By the way, some of the best soccer players in the world are from Liberia. And then our other friend, Oliver, we had gone to junior high with Oliver, and Oliver could run like a deer. So we told the coach at Biola, we said, you need to give Oliver a track scholarship. He said, well, how do I know Oliver is fast? I said, well, he can run a 10.3. And I said, which is pretty stinking fast. And he said, well, how do I know he can run a 10.3? I said, because he just ran in the Olympics for Liberia. He said, okay, when can I sign him up? I'll sign him up. When can I sign him up? Oliver ended up winning 4 indoor and outdoor national titles, 100 and 200 meter for Biola 4 years in a row. But when Oliver's first fall at Biola with us, I had gotten married, and so he was now my brother's roommate. In fact, they shared a bunk bed. And so when Thanksgiving rolled around, a family in town that we knew invited us for Thanksgiving. So naturally, Paul and I asked the host, can we invite Oliver? You know, our families were all back in Africa. And the woman answered, she said, I'm sorry, don't bring Oliver. I don't have enough chairs. I was like, I was only in college, but like, are you kidding me? Do your neighbors not have any chairs? Who doesn't have an extra chair in their garage? I mean, seriously. But I don't think it was the lack of chairs. And looking back, and even that Thanksgiving, I have so much regret because I wish I hadn't gone to the dinner myself. I wish I had instead gone to Nagel's Tacos with Oliver and eaten tacos instead of a Thanksgiving turkey where he wasn't welcomed or wanted. You see, when Jesus came here on earth, he often used dinners and meals to talk about how all people deserve equity. He would say, at my tables, the kind of tables that I have, bring in everyone. In fact, in Luke chapter 14, and I'll just kind of paraphrase this. He says that when you have a dinner, invite people from the other side of town that you would normally not have dinner with, because it might change you. Because for Jesus, the table was a living manifestation of Christ among us. And so when we have meals, we are told to invite everyone, those who are different from us in every way. And so at the Grove, that's why we have these big dining room tables around the room, so that whoever walks into this place knows that this is for you. This church is for you. This church will always be about equality and dignity for every person. So as I say that, my challenge to you, like with the others, is that equality and dignity is something that I want to challenge you to talk about in your workplaces, to model before your children, to show your neighbors and your friends. In your post and in your writing, in your books and your articles, write about the equal worth and dignity in every person. And I'll ask you again, what if there was a college that in its curriculum, it dedicated its curriculum to teaching equality and dignity? And I want to say, today there is. Its name is Justice College. Thank you, everybody.